Welcome to California in Focus. I'm Eliana Kernodle, standing in for David Mastio this week. Joining me today, as always, is the Center Square's California reporter, Kenneth Schrupp. Kenneth, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great today. Thanks for having me on.
We're recording this on Tuesday, November 21st. I hope you are all having a good Thanksgiving week. Today's story is about a federal magistrate who issued a R&R to a district court judge calling for a preliminary injunction against the California Community College System's diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility mandate for hiring, training, and evaluating professors. So, Kenneth, can you just start us off? What's an R&R and what are these new regulations?
Sure, let me start with the R&R. An R&R is a report and recommendation that is issued by a magistrate judge, which is a higher level judge at the federal level than a district judge. That is a report and recommendation for the district judge to consider adopting or completely ignore for the basic merits of this case. What this does exist to do is to allow the district judge to have cover for making certain decisions or even to just go off on his own way. This new R&R is against, in part, a preliminary injunction against these new diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility mandates for the California community college system as a whole. It really is quite a pervasive requirement that faculty must, and I'm going to quote here, it say, promote and incorporate DEI and anti-racist pedagogy, participate in training to incorporate culturally affirming pedagogy, use data to uncover inequitable outcomes, and articulate the importance and impact of DEI and anti-racism as part of the institution's greater mission. Faculty are also required to, again, quote, lead DEI and anti-racist efforts by participating in DEI groups, including DEI and race-conscious pedagogy and or curriculum and in-campus activities, and introduce new employees to the institution and systems focused on DEI and anti-racism. They're also going to be evaluated on whether or not they are doing these things as much as they should be.
So how has this played out in some actual college campuses? I believe in the story you talk about some professors who've kind of run into some problems with these regulations. What's the story there?
Well, let's start with the plaintiff, Daymon Johnson. He's a full-time history professor at Bakersfield College, California Community College, and he says that these new rules for performance evaluations and tenure reviews make him afraid to speak his mind, and otherwise he thinks he'll lose his job. So this lawsuit is about protecting himself from being evaluated under these rules so that officials aren't telling him what he can say and do in the classroom. There are friends of his who have had major problems here and have gotten fired for doing exactly what Johnson says would lead to his firing, which is speaking their minds. Johnson, in his lawsuit, he says, and I quote again, I refrain from expressing my political views and from freely participating in the intellectual life of the college for fear that defendants will investigate, discipline, and ultimately terminate my employment on the basis of my political views. Johnson's friend, with whom he founded a group called the Renegade Institute for Liberty, is this group that is of more traditional faculty members who, quote, aim to promote and preserve freedom of thought and intellectual literacy throughout the open discourse of diverse political ideas with an emphasis on American ideals and Western historical values. This is something you would not really find at many community colleges in California, but Bakersfield, being where it is, has a large enough cohort of more conservative-leaning professors that this can exist. Johnson founded this organization with his friend Matthew Garrett, who was the faculty lead for the actually college-sanctioned group of professors. And Johnson claims that Garrett was fired for this on-campus lecture he delivered called The Tale of Two Protests, Free Speech and the Intellectual Origins of Bakersfield College Campus Censorship. The dean said that what Garrett said during this speech was something that was unprofessional conduct. And the thing that he said was unprofessional conduct was saying that terms like cultural Marxism aren't hate speech, but instead are speech that challenge a dominant agenda on campus, like the social justice movement. After Garrett was fired, this college president sent a holiday email that Johnson thinks was aimed at intimidating him and the remaining faculty members who are part of this Renegade Institute for Liberty. And it said, we're not going to allow the discontent or views of a few to supersede what we are required to provide at our college and the work that we've intentionally developed to support all members of the community. Based on these things that all happened to Garrett, the judge said, I think that I can't give an injunction for the entire community college system. But at the very least, Johnson will not be investigated for the content of his work as it relates to DEIA-focused faculty performance criteria. And he's protected from being investigated, disciplined, or terminated based on the content or the viewpoint of his social and political speech through his personal capacity in teaching and writing. So Johnson is safe for now, but these regulations still affect the entire California community college system. It'll be very interesting to see how this case plays out in the next few months.
So then is this case primarily based on freedom of speech? Is that the angle that they're taking it?
I mean, it's freedom of speech and association. I think that what the judge said was pretty clear. I think he wrote, California's goal of promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in public universities does not give it the authority to invalidate protected expressions of speech. The judge continued saying, the plaintiff is likely to prevail, and the state's interest in imposing the DEI regulations and the DEI competencies and criteria recommendations do not outweigh the plaintiff's First Amendment rights. So forcing faculty to say certain things and participate in these anti-racist groups and trainings is forcing people to say things they don't agree with, is what the judge is saying.
So then what's kind of the next step for this case now that the judge has passed on this recommendation?
So the R&R goes to the district judge, who can decide what he wants to do with it. He can accept it, he can modify it, he can reject it. He likely will accept it, it seems. But Johnson and the college have 14 days to object to this R&R and file new briefs. And after those 14 days are up, the judge is going to look at the briefs, look at the R&R, and issue a final decision. And in the case of something like this, it's a first decision, because this will just keep getting appealed up and up and up until the case plays itself out. And I think this is going to be a major case that makes its way up to, the Ninth Circuit Court or maybe even the Supreme Court.
Well, this is a very interesting case to keep an eye on. This is policy that's been instituted not just in California, but other places have looked at things like this as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Kenneth Schrupp, this is Eliana Kernodle. Please subscribe, and thanks for listening.